Ḥayy ibn Yaqẓān by Ibn Tufail. Part 4, page 128. Hayy considered all objects in the world of generation and decay, the various species of plants and animals, minerals, and every sort of rock and soil, water vapor and ice, snow, sleet, smoke, flame, and burning embers. He saw that these had among them many different attributes with conflicting effects. They moved, some in the same direction, some in opposite directions from each other. Hayy saw that while physical things differed in some respects, they were alike in others, and after some study and thought, he concluded that inasmuch as things differ, they are many, but inasmuch as they correspond, they are one. At times he would concentrate on the peculiarities which differentiate things from each other, and then things seemed to be manifold and beyond number. Beings seemed to proliferate into an unmarshalable array. Even his own identity seemed complex and multiform, because he was viewing it in the perspective of the diversity of his organs and the specialization of each by its own specific capacity to perform in its own specific task. Each organ, moreover, was itself divisible into a great many parts. So he judged that he himself was many, and so was everything else. But looking at it from the opposite point of view, he realized that no matter how many parts he had, all were connected and contiguous. Thus, they could be said to be one. They differed only in having different functions, and this was due solely to the disposition each received from the animal spirit, to the discovery of which his earlier thoughts had led him. This spirit itself was one, and it was this which was his real self. All other organs served as its tools. He thus established for himself that he himself was one. Shifting his attention to animals in general, Hayy found that each individual was one in this respect. He then considered whole species at a time: deer, horses, asses, the different species of birds. He observed the likeness among individual members of each species in internal and external organs, modes of perception, motion, and appetite. What differences he could find were negligible compared to all the points of congruity. Hayy reasoned that the spirit present throughout the species must be a single entity, undifferentiated except through its division among numerous hearts. If somehow what was divided among all those hearts could be collected in one great vessel, then it would be one thing, like one quantity of water or juice, divided into different bowls and then collected again. Together or separate, the entity is the same. Plurality is predictable of it only from a certain point of view. Hayy thus saw whole species as one in this respect, likening the plurality of individuals to the plurality of each individual's parts, which are not really many. Next, Hayy mentally combined all animal species for consideration together. He saw that they were alike in having sensation, nutrition, and voluntary motion in whichever direction they pleased. These activities, he had learned already, were characteristic of the animal spirit, whereas the respects in which they differed were not particularly essential to the animal spirit. These reflections made it apparent to him that the vital spirit in all animal genera is in reality one being, despite the slight differences that differentiate one species from another, just as water from a single source may be divided into different bowls and may be cooler in some than in others. So the animal spirit is one. Its specific differentia are like the different temperatures of the water, while the animal itself is like the water, which remains one even though it happens to be divided. By thinking in this way, Hayy was able to see the whole animal kingdom as one being. He turned his mind to the various plant species, observing the likeness of all their members in leaf, branch, flower, and fruit, and all the plant functions. By analogy with animals, he saw that, parallel to the animal spirit, plants too must have a single substance in which all partake, and which makes them all one being. Likewise, considering the plant kingdom at large, he judged it must be one because of the universality of growth and nutrition. At this he joined plants and animals together in his mind, since they were alike in nutrition and growth, although the animals are higher than the plants, in that they possess sense perception, locomotion, and sensation as well. Still, plants seem to have something roughly similar, as for example when flowers turn toward the sun, or roots towards food. These considerations showed him that plants and animals are united by a single common entity, more perfectly represented in one and somehow impeded in the other. It was as if water were divided, part running freely and part frozen over. Thus, he saw how animals and plants are one being. Next, he investigated bodies that do not sense or feed or grow, such as stones, earth, water, air, and flame. He saw that these bodies are bounded in length, breadth, and depth, the sole differences among them being in terms of such contrarieties as that some were colored, others colorless, some hot, others cold. He perceived that warm bodies grow cold and cold ones hot. He watched water turn to steam, steam to water, burning things to embers, ashes, flame, and smoke. When rising smoke was trapped in a hollow, it precipitated, and in its place appeared bits of solid rather like earth. This line of thinking, similar to the reasoning he had done on animals and plants, made evident to him that all physical things, despite the involvement of diversity in some respects, are one in reality. He then turned to that entity which, in his belief, united plants and animals. It had to be a body with length, breadth, depth, and, like any ordinary body that does not feed or perceive, either hot or cold. The only differences between this archetypal living being and any inanimate object, in fact, were the life functions it manifested through the use of tools in animals and plants. But perhaps these functions were not properly theirs, but came in from some other being. And if they came into other objects, perhaps these too would come to life. Hayy wondered what he himself might be, stripped of all the functions which seemed at first glance to emanate from himself, and realized that he was no more than another body. These thoughts then brought him to the conclusion that all bodies, whether they are animate or inanimate, are one thing, although some exhibit certain special functions which they implement by organs. But he did not know whether these activities were strictly speaking their own or had come from something else, for at this stage the only beings he knew were physical. In this way Hayy saw all being as one, although it appeared at first glance boundless and without number. For some time he rested content at this stage, but then began to wonder about all these physical things, both living and non-living, which seem sometimes to be one, sometimes to be infinite in number and diversity. He observed that all must either rise like smoke, flame, and air under water, or fall, like water, particles of earth, and parts of plants and animals. All such bodies must move in either one direction or the other, and not come to rest unless stopped by something, as when a falling rock hits hard ground and cannot break through. For if it could, it would obviously have gone on falling. Thus, you can feel it tugging downward against you if you try to lift it. In the same way, Hayy found that smoke would not stop rising unless trapped. And even then, it would curl around left and right, and if there were an air passage, escape and continue rising, since air could not contain it. Hayy observed that if he filled a skin with air, tied it shut, and pushed it under water, it would try to wriggle free and rise until taken out and restored to the air. Then it would stop wriggling upwards and lie quite still. I tried to find some body that neither rose nor fell, or exerted no pull in either direction. But among the objects with which he was familiar, he could find nothing of the kind. He sought such an object purely in the hope of finding out what it was to be a body as such, free of all the qualities that give rise to plurality. After he had worn himself out looking, studying all the objects that bore the fewest predicates, without finding one that could not be said to be either heavy or light, as we express it, he began to investigate heaviness and lightness themselves. Did they belong to bodies qua body, or did they both arise from something distinct from the physical? It seemed plain to him that both must stem from some separate principle. For if they belonged to body in virtue of its being body, then every material object would have both. In fact, however, we know that heavy objects have no buoyancy and light ones no gravity, yet they remain bodies all the same. Thus, over and above physicality, each has its own differentiating factor. If not for this added factor, the two would be identical. Clearly, the substantiality of objects, both heavy and light, were compounded of two factors: the physicality they have in common, and linked with it either gravity or buoyancy. That is what moves them upwards or downwards and makes them different.